Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be discussing today something that has been in the news, something that has been in top of mind there and pretty relevant, I think, across multiple industries. I'm here today with Hugo Cuevas-Mohr of CrossTech. I'm Erick Schneider, and we've been discussing on an informal basis, and we wanted to share with you a couple of thoughts across three different areas. The first one is remittances. The second one is the broader cross-border payment impacts with tariffs. The third one is, what do we do about it? So let's jump right in. We've talked a bit about this piece. Question one on the remittances. We've seen some changes. We know that this is very important as migrants are being moved back to their countries, for example. There are a few key industries that we've discussed. There's the construction, where they represent over 13%. There is the hospitality, which represents over 10%, and there's agriculture, which represents over 12%. In your thoughts, Hugo, what do you think is going to be the impact, not only to the actual diaspora, but to the money flows from remittances?
Look, this is, for me, like other issues that have happened in the past. The economic crisis in 2008, the COVID, where every one of us, every expert in the field thought that they were going to go down, 15, 20%. That didn't happen. Remittances are very resilient. And that's something that we have to think about this time around too. So my mind is set on that. Now, we can speculate. We don't really know. I try to talk to people who are closer to the ground, let's say agents. Cash agents know the people, they talk to them, people come to them. When you go through an app, yes, these companies have data, and data takes some time to move. And sometimes you have to then think, why is this happening? But the agents know it like that, firsthand. So I've been talking to some of them, and I still keep some of the contacts that I've made through so many years in different states. So it's not the same thing in every state. There are some states where migrants feel more threatened than others. And so there's a movement out of some states. Florida is the case. There's movement out of Florida. Maybe it's the same movement out of Texas. I don't really know enough information to say that. But one thing that was very interesting in my talks is that migrant families are sending their deported family members money because they're going back to maybe their country, maybe to a third country, but they need money to eat, to survive, even if they're staying with a long forgotten uncle. So they are sending money, and migrants are coming to the same agents they've been doing for years and just talking. Oh, this is, my brother, my son, my nephew, so this is happening. So the immediate impact has not been really felt. Some of the agents say that. We still need to collect data and see if that's true for the whole industry. Something interesting too, because when migrants are afraid, if they have money in play, like in the United States, they're thinking of plan B. What if I am deported? Why if we have to leave? I have some savings. I even have a house. Some agent told me that somebody had approached him and says, how do I send money because I'm going to sell a little apartment that we have? And they go to a remittance place because they're not thinking about a bank. How do I send my money? Of course, the remittance channels are not made for large sums of money. For many reasons, compliance reasons, history in itself. And business payments in that migrant world are not really yet established in the way that they can use it. But they are thinking of sending money. So there's plan B coming up. And I this is not only happening with, the Latin American migrants, the poorer migrants, let's say. People who have money are also thinking, what about this? What about that? They hedge their bets, So I think that the impact is not imminent. When there is crisis, things shift around. and we're going to see quite a bit of shifting around. But I don't think that we're going to see that impact so high. Something else that is interesting, if undocumented migrants tend to hide, because some of them will be hiding, of course, then some of the ones who are legal will, because of the shortage of these in some of these industries, they're probably going to be paid more. They're going to probably send more money home because they don't know how the situation will be. Of course, some of these jobs, they're going to get more money per hour for their jobs. Some of these industries might not be able to subsist on paying higher wages. Who knows? But I think that a lot of things are happening here that we have to take into account and not jump into the conclusion that, okay, there's deportations, remittances are gonna trash. No, I don't think so at all. How long? How long is this uncertainty going to last? Who knows? Nobody.
I love the optimistic view, and I think this is interesting that you broke it down into short-term, medium, and long-term. I happen to think that in long-term, we're all dead, right? But in the short term, there's a offset of transactions that are being sent to the deportees by their loved ones over here. And these are the smaller transactions that we see, the average transaction size $400. The second piece that you mentioned I thought is interesting is ones that are thinking about repatriating their entire nest egg back to their home country. And this is going to be much higher than the average transaction. Here we're talking thousands. In your thought process, what's the best channel for that? Do they still use the traditional remittance ones? Because as you mentioned, it's not really for larger volumes. What's your perspective on the volume size?
Well, of course they're going to try to do that. And they're going to start thinking of other ways. The bank channel is not that evident. I mean, if we are in the payments world, well, you go and send a wire transfer. But we know that that's not. So there's going to the finding the alternative methods. Look, we know that countries that have problems migrants have been using cryptocurrency to send money home. A number of them. I am sure there is knowledge in the migrant communities of someone who's done it and has done it well. That person is going to become a master in that. I know one person in Philippines that became that, and he did it for so long just as a consultant because he knew that to do it himself he needed a license and all that, and he just became a consultant just with a fraction of money. So that's going to happen. I'm sure people are going to think on other ways. Yes, eventually they're going to use banks, probably some of them. And maybe some of the apps that are catering for larger payments, they probably going to that. There's new payment rails that are being developed for business payments. How fast companies in this industry react is what always is in my mind, because all these alternative channels have been there. We've been discussing them in the CrossTech events. I've been discussing them, and it just is slow, and I know, because regulation, fears, banking, insecurity, and all that. But those are going to happen.
Okay, I'm glad you brought this up because this is one of the topics that's going to be discussed at CrossTech Payments in May in New York coming up there. And on that point, what impacts do you see to the wider cross-border payment industry? You talked about business payments, for example. Tariffs are front and center right now. I'm sure that we have the import-export companies, individuals, and also the cross-border payment firms themselves thinking about how do they prepare. What are some of the trends that you're seeing?
Look, and you're going to see that also I'm an optimist in that sense too. That's my way of seeing things because and we've discussed that, the two of us, is disruption sometimes is seen as a bad word. Disruption is opportunities, and we know that opportunities are going to open. What companies are going to be more flexible is the key. And that normally happens with the smaller companies because bigger companies take time. There's a lot of discussion going on, etc., etc. and some of the bigger companies become, elephants who are difficult to turn, or let's say rhinos, But the flexibility here is important. Why I think this is because with all these disruptions, there are going to be a lot of companies looking for other markets. Other markets mean I have to find ways to pay them. Yes, there's wire transfers, like most companies are using still for cross-border payments, even if sometimes it's cheaper through a channel, getting better foreign exchange, etc., etc., etc. But the security of the banking system, and that's understandable. Everybody measures the risk in different ways. But I think there is a big opportunity for these companies that are looking for trade ways to say, okay, I cannot export because this tariff, I cannot import. Where could I import from? So, and how do I pay? Because it's not only to decide, it's how do I pay? Some of this alternative who have maybe smaller trades and maybe smaller tariffs, they will say, okay, pay me this way, pay me this other way. How many companies are ready, have partners in some of these countries? Because if you just happy, you have a good volume to the usual places, Mexico, UK, this and this and that. No, there's going to be an onslaught of new trading routes. I think south to south payments are going to flourish because you need to see other ways. I was talking about t-shirts for Vietnam. They're going to be much more expensive in the US. Maybe they're going to be much cheaper to Brazil.
Even if they do, I have a different perspective on that. And while south to south may be continuing to grow, is it going to be as relevant as the impact of, is it going to offset, let's say, a 10% drop into the United States, for example? There I have my doubts. I think that large markets such as the United States, such as Europe, are still going to be the cornerstones for this key driver. And if I take a look at this, I like your point about the silver lining. I'll try to be as optimistic as you are on this. But if we see the macro changes coming through, I think it's interesting that this 34% change to China. China is driven by dollars and cents. Companies are driven by dollars and cents. Yes. And I think this is going to be the mentality of companies that they go through, and they're going to find solutions. One of the solutions that has been discussed is China saying, you want to charge me 34%, but Vietnam is only going to be at 20%. China's going to have a partnership, JV, something to that effect, with an institution in Vietnam, right? And so we're going to see shifts of volume. Instead of all to China, it may be more to Vietnam. What this means to companies, for example, right? And what are the impacts and all is we have to make sure that these companies that are doing cross-border payments are prepared in order to see these volume shifts with the trading routes. And by prepared, I don't just mean the technology side. Technology is great, but it's not the only solution. From the compliance side as well, from the operating side, from the regulatory side. This is actually leading me into the next question, right? Which is, okay, we see these macro trends. We expect volume to stay relatively constant in an opportunistic way, but also in an optimistic method there. I also happen to think, though, that there has to be change at the ground level. We can't just wait for governments and then hear what the clients want to do with saying, what do we do? Proactively, these companies have to start taking steps. Obviously, I think it's going to be on the compliance side, regulatory side, and the technology side, but I'm keen to hear your thoughts is, what would your guidance and advice be to cross-border payment firms right now? What should they be doing besides not panicking?
Look, the only thing that they shouldn't be doing is just waiting to see what happens. You can't sit in your own little space and just wonder and look at the numbers and the data. The data is going to take some time to catch up to really be able to tell you how to react. So it is the moment to use your creative side of your brain, and that's always the same case in every crisis. Is how do I see my company? What are my routes, my rails, and how to have a plan B, a plan C for this, for that, and open yourself also to explore other options. there might be some companies in Europe thinking, hey, this is the time to buy a company in the United States just to be there. Who knows? Maybe there's the same thing for a US company says, I should, go into Europe and establish myself there. Am I going to buy or am I going to start from scratch? They come to me and I always say, look, it's better. I mean, because of regulatory, because knowing the ecosystem, knowing the banks, etc., buy, So maybe we're going to see some more M&A deals happening. I don't know. I think if companies have to react in looking at ways, and not only partners, these partners you have to find ways to be more efficient in payments. And this is where we come to different rails that are being developed. MasterCard is developing its rails, Visa is developing its rails. There are parallel rails to the banking system, even if it touches the banking system in some ways, like all touch, like crypto and stablecoin touch the banking system in a way. And I think some banks are looking at that and saying, hey, I don't want to be left out. I want to be part of the ecosystem, even if I'm not the main driver of that ecosystem. So new settlement methods this is the moment for them, really. And I see that it has to happen because some of those markets will be keen to try new ways, not established ways of always been doing things. So I'm optimistic in that sense. Yes, of course, everything depends on how the global economic impact are going to hurt economies. Because if the whole economies are hit, of course, everything slows down. Yes.
True, but let me be optimistic on this side, and I'll take a page from you there on seeing it is.
Please.
What if we see this as a catalyst, right? So we've been talking about the tariffs and the impacts and all. This is situation. What if this is the catalyst? Because if you're thinking about it and understanding what you're saying, you've got potential threats over here where you have the MasterCard and Visas building their own rails. You've got small startups taking opportunities on one side. You've got the other side where there's been growth on the technology side, such as blockchain technology. Obviously, I'm a big fan there, right? But there are other factors going through, alternative payment methods to go on. And then you have this new set of clientele that are saying, we have more volume and now we're being threatened. So this is the impetus for the cross-border company to take all those extrapolated points, put them together and say, all right, so what? Now what do I do? How do I offset? How do I partner with, or how do I make sure that I am prepared in order to continue to grow my business? There are a few different things. You talked about partnerships, and I think this is an interesting one. You talked about purchasing, and I think this is another silver lining. Look, continue to being optimistic there. My wife is going to love me when I get home, by the way, with this part. So on the optimism side, we've seen a drop, 5% there to our stock portfolio on Friday alone. But this means that companies, especially public ones, are going to have a lower market cap. They're going to be much more palatable for an acquisition, for example, if they have. And this is where other parties within the industry, venture capitalists, for example, private funds that are going to be able to implement and offset this drop by saying this is an opportunity to buy. So we may see consolidation in. I also want to talk and I get your thoughts about the new technologies. I mentioned blockchain there. Not all cross-border blockchains are the same. Not all functionalities on tokens are the same. Stablecoins, another sexy topic that we've broached before at CrossTech events, and I want to continue to do so. Do you think there's an opportunity, leading question, by the way, for stablecoins in order to offset a lot of the uncertainty in markets now?
Definitely. Look, I've said it to you many times in our talks. I've learned mostly what I know about crypto, blockchain, stablecoins is from you. All right? Of course, I listen to you, I read, I talk, and I try to find my way of thinking, and always, I see it on the historical side, and I wrote my book, Sending Money, which is the history of the money transfer remittance businesses. So and you know that I am a biologist. My first degree is in biology. I'm an evolutionist, so I always think everything on how things evolve, and this is also part of that evolution, and we've seen that evolution coming. You know, I think that, you know, when we first had our first Bitcoin talk in 2012 in one of the conferences, I thought that it was going to come faster than it has done. But there has been a lot of problems, regulatory issues, and also the banks, you know, and being very, and the companies saying, I don't want to mess with my banking relationships. Is I go into crypto, I might lose my account. That has happened a lot. That is changing, and this new government in the United States is opening itself to stable coins, to crypto. Things are changing. We will see how much they will change, but I think that in some countries it's changing even faster. So I think it's going to happen. How soon? We don't know. But we've seen some news gathering about how much you can do, and you know, the stable coin rails are also a parallel payment settlement system
100%
on itself, and if the foreign exchange is good, if the cost is low, and there is the fear of regulation of using it, etc., is dropped, of course. It's like you have a dam and there is a river. The flow is here. You open this and it works well. It's going to keep on growing. So for me, it is going to happen, and I'm glad because I want to see it happening. Really, even though I come from remittances, you know, sent by fax and all this story that I always tell, and some people.
Do we have to explain what a fax machine is there, just to make sure? Okay.
But for me, because I love technology, and I love how everything is moving. So from that evolutionary point of view, is coming. How soon? Look, you need to be prepared. If the payment companies that they're thinking globally, even if they have, you know, a very niche market to certain countries, if they're not looking at other settlement ways, somebody else will do it faster, cheaper, and they're going to take the market.
I would say somebody else is doing it. And when's the right time? Yes. Yesterday. That's my perspective on this. And I like how you framed it, because it does need a regulatory environment in order to be fomented and to grow. It needs the right players in place. And I think that we're at that piece right now. What's missing there is still the adoption. And I think this is one of those catalysts that is going to accelerate the adoption, especially because we think about it. You talked about this a little bit, right? So it's less expensive from a foreign exchange standpoint. It's faster for settlements to go through. But that's not true for every single market. And I also don't want to say that stablecoins is going to replace fiat. It's not, right? No. And we're talking about US to Euro, for example. It's fast, it's immediate.
How much we've talked about the cash agents disappearing. They're still there.
We've talked about it for decades, yes, and they're flourishing.
Yes, they will still there because people like to go and talk to real people. So what we see is just so much diversity in settlement ways, payment systems. So that's all. There's going to be much more diversity, and I've seen it through the years doing the events. It's been interesting from that sense. Since 2010, when we started, it's just looking at people and companies coming and ways. So diversity is maybe it's not a great word to use nowadays, but in this industry, it is. There's so many payment routes and rails and systems of working, and really I've been saying it is like partnership in asteroids, because nobody can do it alone. There's very few companies out there, still some, that says I can do it alone. From this origination to the settlement and to payment. No way. There's so many. The chain is multiplying, and the different alternatives for those rails is something that companies, every one of them, should be looking at, I think.
I'm totally with you. I think that the idea is you don't just say, all right, I'm a company, I'm going to go off, I'm going to do my own stable coin, I'm going to be able to send it itself, right? It's what partnership is going to have the expertise in order to do this? What partner is going to give you the ability to drive compliance and regulatory environments in this? AI, for example, has been a huge game changer in, right? So as we talk about technology and growth through blockchain stablecoin, it's not the only one. I'll get back to the stablecoin piece because I thought of something else there that I wanted to share. But from a component of what can a single company do, I don't think they can do everything by themselves. And I don't think they should. No. Focus on what they do best. Is this managing the relationship with the client? Is this ensuring that they have the proper network around? Whatever the case is, focus on that and rely on other partners that are trusted, mind you, and that are vetted and they're gone through the due diligence component. They're making sure that they're part of it too. All right, I want to get back to the stablecoin component because this is something that I thought about and let me get your thoughts. Part of the driver of stablecoin is it's faster and less expensive from foreign exchange, but that's if you're sending from Zimbabwe to Vanuatu. Not too many people are doing that there, for the record. However, if we're adding an extra layer to this, which is the impetus of tariffs, for example, right, which we've been discussing, of the dollar going from the United States to Vietnam to China, as we've seen, everybody takes their bite as it goes through, right? You've got the middleman, and $1 gets there to 95 cents, gets to the next place to 89 cents. This is where I think stablecoin is going to have a much stronger leg to stand on, because this isn't just going to be A to B to C and you're taking dollar degradation across the way. The stablecoin can go A to B to C and take minor basis points in a very fast way and in a way that it's very easy for reconciliation, which is the other key component there. So strongly bullish. Buy Bitcoin is still my strong belief on this point. Final thoughts, Hugo, on this. What?
Let me. Don't get your. Now, look, the industry, the money transfer, the cross-border payments industry, for a long time, a number of investors from the industry have wanted to do the bank for the industry, where everybody has an account and people just credit and debit inside the bank, so they don't have to do wire transfers 3 days and this and this. Never happened. Regulatory matters, a lot of money was invested. I know in my time in this industry, maybe 4 or 5 groups of people who spent a lot of money trying to build that. Now, that with stablecoins is so easy to do, or relatively easier to do, because if you have a trusted partner who can have, let's say, a stablecoin where you can trade, you credit and debit in a way. I'm being very simplistic, I know, but in my mind, that's how I need to see things to understand. So I said, why not? Especially when you say that A, B to C to D to E. Why do you need, I mean, just imagine all of that just by doing wire transfer. You can't do it. It will be too long, too difficult. Yes, you can do it, of course, but it will be long, difficult, and
expensive. Yeah.
You see? So that's what I wanted to say before you were going to ask a question.
Spot on. All right. Thought processes. We talked about the remittance industry. We talked about diaspora. We talked about the tariffs, large-scale impacts, and also impacts to cross-border payments. And we talked about what companies should be thinking about right now, which the basic one is keep moving, be proactive. What are some final thoughts that you want to share?
Well, look, when there is uncertainty, companies say, okay, what do I do with my budget? And it's interesting that one of the things that are always cut is marketing. And I have a marketing mind, and I think that's something that always drives me and says, this is not the time. You need to be out there You cannot be just rely in just, and there's many ways of depends what marketing is for you, what side of the chain you're in front of the customer or not, etc. But marketing is also promoting yourself to the industry, to the partners. We try to do that. That's been, as a consultant, I've done that forever. Just matching partnerships. I've done it through the events, which is something that is like, okay, the events are the buffet. You can go pick up. If you want to tailor the system, you reach out for us and we do the consulting, we do the matching. So that's something that I feel is very, very important.
The definition of marketing, to your point though, it's extrapolated beyond just the customer touch points. It's multiple touch points with vendors, with regulators and all. It's marketing as visibility. Okay, exactly. Okay, it's making sense.
Exactly. Because in uncertainty, you have to build trust. Trust is key. When you feel uncertain about things, you need to hold on to something that is that you can trust. And this is the moment to build that trust, really, to say, I'm there, I'm here, and I'm solid. I'm here, going through the hurricane. If you're my, that's my final.
Until the next hurricane. This is the constant piece of
yes.
People should not be complacent. Companies should be thinking about how do they leverage this for the opportunity. I liked your piece about disruption and this being a positive as opposed to a negative. So stay optimistic, and if you want to join the conversation, we're going to be at CrossTech Payments in May in New York.
And we're going to be also in September in Guatemala, and of course our main event in World in November in Miami. And this is where all these discussions taking place. This is where I met you, and
right.
And it has led to not only a friendship, but we've done very nice projects together too. So, thank you very much.
Cheers all.
And thank you, Erick.
Thank you, Hugo.